It is an absolute honor to welcome to the show this week someone that I would call an inspiration, someone that I look up to, someone who I don't actually really know, that I've never really talked to outside of a couple exchanges here and there, but I feel like I know them. I'm, of course, talking about Michelle Smallmon. Michelle, I have to tell you this. You are one of the reasons that I would say that I got into podcasting, because your podcast, Small Talk, that you co-host with our guy, Steve Cerruti, is my favorite podcast in the world. And I'm a podcast producer. I've been doing this for years. I cannot tell you how many hundreds of different podcasts that I have listened to through the years. Yours is my favorite. And I'm not saying that to butter you up. I mean that from the bottom of my heart. And I say that because a couple reasons. There's a lot of friends out there who are in a room telling their dumb jokes and laughing together and say, oh gosh, we should have a podcast together. We would be great. And then they try and it crashes and burns and it's not as good as they thought it was, like it was in their bedroom. You guys, the conversations that you guys have are so dumb, are so stupid. I never know what to expect every week. It's a new treat every week. It is my favorite show that's gotten me through some tough times in my life. I remember in 2017, pretty much just after you and I crossed paths, I was getting to ESPN just as you were leaving, and you had started your podcast with Steve kind of around that time. And if you remember, as I'm sure you may have experienced in your first year at ESPN, it's a hard year. For me, it was my first year out of college. A lot of nights, weekends, and overnights. What am I doing with my life? How did I end up in Farmtown, Connecticut? Like, I was not a happy person. And it was podcasts that I was listening to that were getting me through my day. As you know better than anyone, you form an intimate relationship with the person that is coming through your earbuds. And it was you and Steve that were getting me through some tough times, that were giving me hope to just keep grinding and giving me some energy and some laughs when I needed it. Ditto during the pandemic. In the early days of the pandemic, you guys were pushing out stellar podcasts about Taylor Swift's album drops, about the A+ content that you guys were shelling out. And I mean, Michelle, you and Steve, I cannot tell you how much you mean to me, and I'm really glad that I've gotten the chance to tell you that. So, Michelle, thank you for being here, and thank you for everything that you've done for me.
Oh my gosh, that is quite an intro. Thank you so much. I am so incredibly flattered because, well, first of all, that's just so kind of you. And I'm so glad that we're getting to have this conversation and connect in this way. But isn't that kind of the goal of all of this, is to make someone feel something or make someone feel like they know you? Because you could tune into any sort of media outlet. There's so many different options these days, whether it's TV or podcasts or YouTube, social media. Everyone's on TikTok now. There's so many different ways to find content or content creators, and to find someone that really feels like this is something that I'm going to tune into every week, and I know these people and I'm going to make them a part of my daily routine. That's the goal of all of this. So I'm so glad that you connected with our stupid pod, because as you mentioned, who knows what we even talk about at the time. Most of it's unplanned. So it's kind of just a pod about nothing. So the fact that it has meant something to you means a lot to me. So thank you for saying that.
It's the only podcast where when it hits my feed, when a new episode hits my feed, I have to listen to this. I have to listen to this today. I don't delay it. And the best thing, the most important thing in this world of overflowing content that you can watch and listen to is when you can create a sense of fandom or community around a show. There's a lot of content out there, but there's not that much that creates that. The shows, the things that do stand out are the ones that make you feel like I can connect with you, or I can connect with a fan who listens to Small Talk. I genuinely believe that if you guys hosted a Small Talk get-together in St. Louis, that I would buy the first plane tomorrow out to St. Louis to come meet you and the rest of the Shellies, which is your fans.
Well, that's so funny that you mentioned that, because at the very beginning, this was, I think, even pre-pandemic, we had a Small Talk meetup, and there were people from St. Louis that came, but other people from other states drove in. There was a pair of friends that I think they were living in West Virginia at the time, and were driving to Chicago, and they stopped in St. Louis to meet us at the Small Talk meetup, which was insane to me. It just absolutely blew my mind, because it's one thing to have someone who might know me from my day job, which is the host of the morning show on 101 ESPN here in St. Louis, and want to come and hang out and maybe talk St. Louis sports. It's quite another for people to derail their trip somewhere so they could drive in town and meet us. And you know what was amazing? Every person that showed up, I would hang out with. They truly were people that I would have been friends with / became friends with afterwards. And that is what's amazing about having a community that listens, because if you want to listen to someone talk about the Cardinals, you have to come through me on 101 ESPN. You have to come through me to get to the Cardinals. With a podcast, you're coming up because you want to hear what I have to say, or because you want to hear what Steve has to say. And so I think that kind of fosters a little bit more of, for lack of a better term, brand loyalty, because people actually are choosing to listen to you and connect with you.
I'm not into pop culture or reality TV at all, but if there's some big story that happens, it's Michelle Smallmon in Small Talk that I want to come to hear the instant reaction.
Oh, well, thanks. Well, then you're going to hate the next episode that's coming out, because there's a lot of reality TV. I ran into a Real Housewife of Beverly Hills the last time I was in New York and hung out with her. So that's basically the entire next episode. So I'm not sure if you'll be a fan of it.
Sneak peek. I can't wait. How did you and Steve first get the idea for doing Small Talk?
Oh, gosh. Okay. So Steve and I met in Bristol at ESPN. We both worked on the same show, Rousseau and Cannell. We were both producers of the show and became fast friends. And that is really rare. You always kind of want to like the people that you work with. But as you know, when you work on a daily show, whether it's radio or TV, it's a very intimate environment. You're talking to and spending time with these people more than you are your family or your significant other, because you're constantly having to communicate and come up with ideas and spend time together. So Steve and I clicked right away. We became friends right away. And I remember one of our bosses had come up to us and said, and granted, this was many years ago. This was like 2016, 2017. So podcasts were around, but they certainly were not the monster that they are today. And they said, we need more podcast content. Is there anything that you guys can come up with that might be like a sneak peek or a sneak behind the curtain of what's going on in the show? So we started when we were at ESPN, a podcast called the Post Show Podcast, where we would pop on the air and we would talk about what happened on Rousseau and Cannell, give fans a little view behind the curtain. And it ended up morphing into us debating about Beyonce and Rihanna and all of these different things. But that's truly what we would talk about during commercial breaks or when we were at lunch. So it was kind of Small Talk before Small Talk. And then I left ESPN to come home to host the morning show in St. Louis. And Steve left ESPN to host an NBA podcast. And so many people had listened to the Post Show Podcast. We thought, maybe we should just continue this. And more importantly, we want an excuse to catch up every week and an excuse to talk to each other so that we don't lose touch. So we started Small Talk and it just kind of grew from there.
What's been your favorite episode that you've done? I know they all run together. You've done hundreds of them so far. I'll start. My favorite is the state draft. That is, I've listened to that probably 3 separate occasions on long car rides, because I've lived. Each time I've listened to it, I've lived in a different state, and I've wanted to hear what you said about each state. Basically, you guys do these drafts, like an NFL draft style draft, where you've done candy drafts, you've done the disgusting word draft, you've done chip drafts, and you did the state draft, which was the best one, where basically like, hey, I'm giving you the map of the United States, you choose 25 states, and you go in order, choose your state, and make your justification for why you've chosen it. To be, in your country, which I forget what your country, Smallmon, your country was Smallmon, and then New Cerulean was Steve's country. But the state draft was my favorite episode. What was yours?
Well, we get the most response from the state draft. People still will comment to me about the state draft. It is, Steve later made a trade, weeks later.
He traded Vermont away, I think.
After he was on ESPN Vermont to talk about why he chose Vermont, he traded them. But you know what? There's no loyalty in this game, and you better learn that quick. The state draft is out there, but I would say my favorite pod might have been one of the ones we did with Tommy Rees, who is now the offensive coordinator / quarterbacks coach at Notre Dame.
Oh, yeah.
He is a friend of the pod, friend in life, and he had reached out to us about listening to the pod, and we got to chatting with him. We're like, okay, well, we obviously have to have you on, but we need to develop a really curated role for you. I just didn't want to have him come on and talk about football. That just wasn't fun enough or creative enough. And honestly, he probably doesn't want to do that either. Most athletes are sick of talking about themselves or about the sport that they play. So Game of Thrones was so hot at the time, and it was the final season. And if you remember, every week was essentially the Super Bowl because everybody was watching the show at the exact same time and having all of this commentary on it. And simultaneously, the NFL draft was happening. So Tommy Reese was our Game of Thrones correspondent, and he, Cerruti, and I did NFL draft comps for Game of Thrones characters. We basically did like draft reviews and draft breakdowns of Game of Thrones characters. But that was so fun because we had the draft music and the chimes, and we had written out, we put in so much work to write out these draft comps for these players. Like, the Night King, he has a cannon for an arm, ice in his veins. He can convince the men in the huddle to follow him into battle. Just these really ridiculous things that actually really applied to what was happening topically in sports. So that was one of my favorites.
Yeah.